I'm Howie Lim. This is Money Hacks by the Business Times. Budget 2025 was announced in February, and now we're eyeball deep in the Committee of Supply debates, which is where Parliament sits to look into each ministry's plans. How much will Budget 2025 go to alleviating businesses' concerns, our concerns, if you will? We'll find out today. Welcome to Money Hacks by the Business Times, a podcast series where we explore useful financial tips to help you on your wealth-growing journey. I'm Howie Lim. So today, helping us to figure out Budget 2025 is Christopher Gee. He's the Deputy Director at the Institute of Policy Studies at NUS, and also Yong Jiahao, Partner, Corporate Tax at KPMG in Singapore. Gents, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us here.
So where were you 18th of February? Glued to your TV sets? What stood out for you? Christopher, maybe from Budget 2025.
For me, Budget 2025 for businesses was characterized by the corporate income tax rebate, which is the broadest measure of all that was announced on Budget Day. Corporate income tax rebate, 50% in the year of assessment 2025, will, for all companies with at least one local resident employee, get something back from the government through the rebate.
But there are all these sort of conditions tied to it. We will get into that a little later on. And that was the thing that stood out to you the most.
Indeed, because it showed me what the government is thinking of doing. It is very much a redistributive policy. Taxes for largest, most profitable companies, but giving it back to the largely smaller, medium-sized companies.
Jiahao, what about you? Might that have stood out for you as well, or something else?
I would really like to say that I think this is a budget for everyone. If you look at the key themes of this budget, it's quite clear that they will focus on innovation, technology, and talent development. Some of the key measures that stood out to me were really like the 3 billion that's going to be put into the National Productivity Fund. There's also the 1 billion that we're going to invest in R&D infrastructure in terms of the biotech and the semiconductor industries. And of course, the SGX listing incentives. These are measures that will go a long way in helping to boost the whole ecosystem in Singapore.
Very good, Jiahao, helping me with my job. So he's mentioned a couple of them, certain industries like aviation, biotech, semiconductors, lots of money being allocated to those industries. Do you have thoughts or concerns that it's only these certain sectors and industries that are benefiting from this budget? Since you brought it up, Jiahao, go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't think that this is really a concern per se. For the longest time ever in the industry, tax practitioners like myself have been trying to push for very targeted support on very focused area, aviation, semiconductor, and the biotech industry. I think it's important for us to look at expanding our airport capacity. This will allow Singapore to continue to be a critical hub for global travel and trade. Likewise, investing in areas like semiconductors and biotech, these are key areas that really fuels the growth of Singapore. So it's vital to understand that this investment can create a ripple effect that ultimately benefits Singapore.
But how do you tie that into the budget had something for everyone then? What do you think, Christopher?
Yeah, I think this ripple effect, economists will call it positive spillovers, where you invest, let's say, in transport infrastructure like the airport. This has generalized benefits for everybody. It also draws investment into Singapore because this is a nice place to do business and to transport goods and people. These are the spillover benefits that if you do it in a targeted manner, if you invest in things that have a long runway and a long payoff, these are the right things to do.
Let's talk about then measures to revitalize Singapore's stock market, the SGX. Some have argued, though, that this may dampen investor confidence in sustained growth. What do you think?
You've got to think about these as a chain of measures. The investments that we are making, like the investments into infrastructure, into biotech, into the productivity fund. So all of this is upstream. Then you end up with the downstream effects once a company is successful enough to be listed. So you're sort of encouraging the ecosystem, that idea that you build this out holistically and invest long term. Then you get this pathway towards an investment that the broader public can invest in.
In an oversimplified question then, Jiahao, will I see my investments grow then with the stuff that the government is doing to revitalize the Singapore stock market?
interesting question. If we look at historical data, in 2024, there were probably like 20 delisting in the SGX with probably only 4 listing. So really what the government is trying to do is to try and attract investors to come back into Singapore, and hopefully that can drive your investment to grow. But ultimately, we all recognize that the challenge in the current equity market is really the liquidity and the valuation. This is not something that can be resolved overnight. I think the Equities Market Review Group is still looking at what other measures can be introduced to really boost the equity market. So really what we are hoping is that the subsequent phase, we can actually see measures being introduced to help and drive out the fundamental challenges, liquidity, and the valuation of shares in Singapore.
So earlier you mentioned that $1 billion fund to provide more private financing options for high-growth local enterprises. There are these conditions that the government has put on. You have to be a profitable company before I help you out. That sort of feels counterintuitive to me. Christopher, enlighten me, please.
It's difficult, isn't it? If you put public money into an unprofitable business that really ends up nowhere, as a Minister for Finance, you'll really be blamed.
Yep.
But they're the ones who need the help.
Well, you've got to make the right choices. You want to have some criteria for that investment. Any good investor would require that. Whether its eligibility criteria is too rigid or not, we can always argue. But there should be some.
Yeah, we don't have all day, unfortunately. Jiahao, what do you think? Is what Christopher's saying making sense?
I totally agree with Chris on that. Ideally, we really want to help businesses that has a viable business plan. And sometimes these are the ones that may not find easy in trying to go through the traditional bank finance. So which is why, having such a fund can actually help businesses like this to thrive.
The other big thing is whether or not we are AI ready. AI is the buzzword because the push for an AI-ready ecosystem is continuing. Do you think that Budget 2025 revealed enough programs to sort of close that AI capability gap that we may be facing?
There was a specific initiative announced, the Enterprise Compute Initiative, $150 million, to allow companies to partner up with the cloud services companies and the consultancies that would need to build these customized, tailored solutions for each company. Because it's also new. We need to test this out and see what we get. At least there is this seed money now, 150 million plus whatever people can bring to the table themselves to invest in this space.
What really is it that is holding companies back from embarking on the AI journey? Sometimes it's not just about the cost, which obviously is what the government is trying to resolve now. Sometimes it's about not having the required knowledge to go about starting on this journey. So I think besides having this funding available to help companies embark on their AI journey, it's also about these businesses taking up this funding and working closely with trade association to really guide them on how to go about deploying AI technologies to help their business. And if you think about it, technologies are evolving day by day. So it's not about relying on this funding will necessarily allow them to get ahead of the curve, but at least what it's trying to do is to make sure that they are not left behind.
Still to come, what about the biggest concerns that businesses outlined? Did Budget 2025 address them? And how effective is the SkillsFuture program in helping companies adapt their workforce? More with Christopher Gee from IPS at NUS and also Yong Jiahao from KPMG in Singapore in a moment.
Lens on Singapore is now bigger and better. The same deep dive exploration of socioeconomic and geopolitical issues which impact our lives here in Singapore and the region is now a video podcast. If watching a conversation is your thing, join Clarissa Montero in monthly conversations about things that matter. Subscribe to the BT Lens On playlist in the podcast tab of the Business Times YouTube channel and start watching today. BT Lens On Singapore, now available in audio and video.
And now, back to Money Hacks from the Business Times.
There were some other concerns, big concerns that businesses laid out before budget. For example, foreign manpower issue. Christopher?
Well, the budget was largely silent on that front. There wasn't a lot out there to specifically reduce cost or to, let's say, even talk about foreign manpower dependency ratios. And instead, the focus of attention was more on the investments, on the redistribution that we talked about earlier.
So now our personal responsibility, right, to invest in ourselves and get better skilled. Do you think these SkillsFuture programs to help companies adapt their workforce to get workers to be better skilled, effective in meeting the shifting global economy and the skills gaps here in Singapore? Jiahao.
The key message that I really see coming out of Budget 2025 is really how all this workforce development grant and SkillsFuture enterprise credit scheme, how all this are actually encouraging businesses to embark on job redesign and also embark on training for the employees to really reskill and upskill themselves. So I think what is clear is that, look, we cannot always rely on foreign manpower to come in to support Singapore. It cannot always be the case whereby we see that there's a talent gap and we start looking outside of Singapore to get it. I think what the government is saying that, look, there is now money on the table. Grab it, upskill, reskill your people so that they are ready for the job of the future. That's another way whereby the Singapore government is trying to resolve the issue with the resource crunch.
And this time round, the SkillsFuture initiatives are going to be offered in the form of an e-wallet. $10,000, use it or lose it. Previously, you had to apply, right? And you had to have the bandwidth, you had to have the space to really dig through the details, right? This time round, it's there on the table for you already.
The government is basically trying to make it easier for people to access the funding so there can no longer be any excuse to say that, I have difficulties getting the grant. It is now there. So grab it, start reskilling and upskilling your people.
You concerned about everything has to be incentivized before people take to it, so to speak?
I mean, to be very honest, these are probably only short-term measures that can help to stimulate the economy. But ultimately, it's really down to businesses to really innovate and build on their technology journey in order to be sustainable for the future. Incentives has its sunset clause. Grants are finite. So companies really, really need to take steps to reinvent and redesign their work processes, increase in productivities through the use of technology and AI.
We didn't hear a lot about green. Singapore's 2030 green plan is not far from now, because how far along are companies really in Singapore on that road to Green Plan 2030? And what more do you think could have been done?
You have to wind back and think about what has been put in place. What has been put in place is our carbon tax. Last year, the first kick-up was introduced. We have now a $45 carbon tax per ton of carbon emissions. And that's going to go up to $50 to $80 per ton by 2030. So this carbon tax arrangement is one way that the price of carbon emissions is being put in. And this should hopefully incentivize the largest emitters, but it will translate to everybody.
Yes. Typically people think about, this means that there's additional taxes to pay. But really what the government is trying to do with carbon tax is really trying to create this mindset shift in people, to let people realize that every decision that they make has an impact on the environment. But of course, as you correctly pointed out, we are just 5 years away from 2030. Could we have seen more initiative in Budget 2025 surrounding sustainability? We do think that there's probably room for more initiatives to be introduced. The government could consider some form of centralized reporting hub, whereby, we can pool together the knowledge and have certain guidance for all these small and medium enterprises to guide them along their sustainability journey. So this is something that will take time, not something that we can achieve immediately. It's just that we need to move much faster than what we are today.
And it's very hard to expect individual companies, individual businesses, individuals or households to do this journey. So when we think about broad measures, in particular, the greening of Singapore's energy inputs, that might be the better way, the quicker way to go. These are things that have to happen anyway, and it's best that the government does this.
Which is also why we have the 5 billion top out to the Future Energy Fund.
And back to the carbon tax, the taxation, the receipts from that, hopefully those amounts are then recycled back into investments in green.
Christopher G. from IPS and US, thank you. Yong Jiahao from KPMG in Singapore. I'm Howie Lim, and this has been Money Hacks by the Business Times.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.